Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be discussing the announcements made by our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to do a U-turn on the government's flagship environmental policies, and we're asking what will that mean for you. And in this programme today I'm joined by Maureen Martin, President of the Christian People's Alliance, together with Derek Mortimer for Prayer for Parliament. So both of you, warm welcome to the programme, and it's great to see you both. I'll start off with you, Maureen. Please can you just give us an update on some of the work and what you've been doing at the Christian People's Alliance, because I know you've got a big conference this weekend.
We do indeed. Thanks, Simon. It's good to be back, as always. So at the moment we're quite busy with our mid-Bedfordshire election. You know that Nadine Dorries resigned her seat, so there's a vacant seat there. So our candidate actually is Sid Cordell, our Inchford leader. So if anyone lives in mid-Bedfordshire, please vote for Sid Cordell, representing CPA in mid-Bedfordshire. We do have our conference coming up this weekend, 29th and 30th of September, Friday and Saturday in Birmingham. So please go to our website, cpaparty.net, to register and attend. We've got some great speakers. It's going to be great. You'll have a wonderful time, not just political information, but also the anointing will be there, because we are Christians after all. So please go to the website and register.
Wonderful. And Derek, it's a pleasure to have you back on Politics Today, particularly representing Prayer for Parliament. And we're just saying it's such an important job that you guys do, going into Parliament, going into our government institutions and praying, because I can imagine that it must be a huge spiritual battleground there. So give us an update.
Yes, hello Simon, thank you very much. Yes, it is a huge spiritual battle. But we remember that Paul quotes that we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, and that's exactly what we do. As I've said before, we go into our prayer room, which we call the war room, and we battle. And we have seen some remarkable results of prayer, and one in particular with regard to the education that's changed things, and we praise God for that. So thank you.
Wonderful. Maureen, what do you make of the announcement by our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announcing last week that he was reversing some of the government's flagship environmental policies that were launched by Boris Johnson himself?
Well, it's clear the Prime Minister is basically saying that these policies are a failure before they even get out of the gate. So if the policies are going to negatively impact families now in 2023, will they not similarly impact families negatively in 2020 or 2035? Of course they will. These policies are geared to impact families negatively, impacting our quality of life. It's a carbon tax. So what he's saying is, I don't want to be the Prime Minister that implements these policies, because they're going to basically cost me an election if I do. It's for political expediency, more than for our well-being as the electorate. So clearly he's saying these policies are not going to work. It's an admission of guilt, if you like. Personally, I think he should scrap the policies altogether. What he's doing, he's delaying them. He's not kind of saying we are going to abolish these policies. He's just delaying them. Personally, I think they should be scrapped altogether, because they're not for the benefit of us, the people. They're supposed to be benefiting the environment, but we are paying for this, whatever the end goal is. And that's the question. What is the end goal of these policies ultimately? This is the question I'd like the answer to.
Very good. So hopefully we'll find out during the course of the programme. And I have to ask you, Derek, what are your thoughts on Western countries' absolute obsession with the zero carbon net emissions, to the extent that it's destroying our economies, our way of life, it's pushing prices up, and even if Britain becomes the greenest country in the world, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever unless there's radical reforms in China or Russia or India, with these industrial nations that are using fossil fuels. It just makes absolute no sense whatsoever. What are your thoughts?
Well, I completely agree with you. You've said what I need to say.
You're not going to get away with that, sorry. You need to elaborate.
No. No, the world global elite are trying to tell us exactly what to do. and their agenda is to bring a one world government in. The whole idea of net zero, maybe there are some fringe benefits which would be helpful, but quite frankly, as far as we're concerned, it's only 1% of the whole world's pollution. And therefore, what we do is of no relevance really at all when China and India particularly.
Absolutely. And Maureen, what do you make of the announcement of the government's ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars will now be put off 5 years from 2030 to 2035? Also says that all new cars have to have zero emissions by 2035, but people will still be able to buy second-hand petrol and diesel cars. Is this a sensible approach to driving, do you think?
Of course it's not. I mean, what the whole agenda is to control our behaviour. So, and the Prime Minister said it himself. He said the consumer should decide. Okay, if we want to buy EV vehicles, they should be available. If we don't want to buy them, want to buy diesel or gas, we should be able to purchase them at our will, not be forced to because of some idiotic legislation that is forcing us to buy one type of vehicle as opposed to another. And the other issue we have to discuss or bring into the light is all these EV vehicles require electricity to run, do they not? Is it going to put a further strain on our grid? And supposedly we are going to get the grid off of fossil fuels and onto renewables. We know renewables cannot supply a constant base load of electricity. We know that because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So when those things are not happening, these renewables are not producing energy. So we need fossil fuels. We cannot have an advanced industrial nation that is prospering on renewable energy. Everyone who has two brain cells to rub together will know that. The Prime Minister knows it, that's why he's rolling these policies back. The electorate is not stupid, okay? We understand that fossil fuels are required, regardless of your net zero obsession, and forcing us to buy EV vehicles is not going to solve the problem. We need to decide, let the consumer be the one that determines the market. If EV vehicles sell, we'll buy them. If they don't, let the car industry make a decision. If they want to sell vehicles, make the ones that are selling. End of story.
Absolutely. And Derek, I'll just read out what the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said at his press conference last week regarding doing a U-turn or kicking into touch some of his key environmental policies. It says people are already choosing electric vehicles to such an extent that we're registering a new one every 60 seconds. But also think that at least for now, it should be you, the consumer, that makes the choice. The government forcing you to do it, not the government forcing you to do it. It's so important that we do not have state overreach and allow the people and the markets to dictate the car industry. And the question, I suppose the question we're asking here, is Rishi Sunak seeing the situation where he's realising that the key government's environmental policies that were put in place by his predecessor, Boris Johnson, will have a devastating electoral impact come the general election next year? And if he wants to remain as Prime Minister, then he needs to kind of push back on all these far-reaching, I would almost say, authoritarian policies that he wants to implement to make our nation greener.
Well, Rishi Sunak needs to realise that they're trying to push this agenda and the infrastructure isn't there. So very well, people are buying the electric vehicles, but there's a lot of places, like my own place, where there is no charging points or anything. Yes, it probably is a good thing to have a higher number of electric vehicles, but the point is it should be the person in the street that makes that decision. Electrical vehicles are expensive. They also have a fire risk at times, and therefore they're not the safest of vehicles. So in one sense he's right, but in another sense he hasn't rowed back enough.
And also see another issue related to this one, and that's the use of kind of gas boilers and using oil for heating. So the government said it's now going to give the public more time to replace their gas boilers with heat pumps. The original plan was to ban gas boilers by 2026, only 3 years away. But now they pushed that back to 2035, and they were expecting the average family to pay anything between 10,000 and 15,000 for these new pump boilers. Where do the government think that we're going to have this money to spare to buy these new pump boilers, when we are so taxed in this country? I think it's the highest tax rates we have since the Second World War that we're facing now.
They're not thinking, that's the problem. That's the issue right there. Listen, I'm a homeowner. I have a perfectly functioning gas boiler. If I don't have a reason to replace that, I will not be replacing it. Because of how much money they're offering me, because apparently they're also offering a voucher to help families replace their boilers. Now, can you guarantee that this new heat pump is going to be more efficient than my gas boiler? They cannot guarantee that. Unless you're willing to replace it totally at cost, we, as the consumer, are not interested in your offer. Not only that, but this money is coming from the tax base. Who's paying for that? We, the taxpayers. So we're paying the government to pay us to replace our boiler. It makes no sense. Again, it's a tool to control us. They want everything on the grid, okay? When everything's electrified, it's more easier to control. It's centralised. The whole point is to centralise everything. It's all going to the carbon credit score, basically. This is where they're heading. This is the direction they're going in. And it's all designed to get us all centralised, all our services centralised, because it's much easier to control. China's the model.
Well, they're frightening social credit system.
Exactly, China's the model. That's what they're aiming for. WEF, that's what their aim is.
And Derek, we see with this announcement made by the Prime Minister about, he's not effectively doing a U-turn on the government's key economic environmental policies, but more putting him into touch for the next 12 years or so, into the kind of mid-30s. But with this high cost of living that's essentially caused by using renewable energy, that's pushed up the cost of producing a fruit and vegetable, which we're now seeing in our supermarkets, and then that's added to inflation. Does he hope that by reversing or kicking into touch these environmental policies, that the British electorate will have more money come the next general election and vote in the Conservatives, or is it to mark a clear distinction between the Conservative Party now and Labour and the Lib Democrats, the main challengers?
I don't think the Prime Minister's gone far enough by a long, long way. The crisis in the standard of living is awful, absolutely awful. People are struggling, really struggling, and I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference, unfortunately. I don't wish to see certain people in power, but it's looking like that. And the Prime Minister has to realise he's got to stop and really reverse things. Otherwise, we're in real trouble.
Yeah, and Maureen and I've done a few programmes on zero carbon net emissions, on the environmental policies. I mean, what we're effectively doing is closing our big power stations, closed down, no longer using coal or fossil fuels, reducing our dependency on kind of nuclear fuel, which is the cleanest, obviously dangerous when we're dealing with nuclear waste, but certainly the most cleanest form of energy. And we're not building kind of new reactors. We are importing wood chips from Canada and using those in our refineries to produce energy, and relying on unreliable renewable energy, as you mentioned, such as wind and solar. Of course, if we have a hot summer, great, but if we don't, we're in trouble. And yet this is meant to drive our economy, give us electricity so we can enjoy our kind of modern standard of living. But do you think now that the government is decided to put a little bit of a break on this for 10 years, that this gives them clear water come the next election from Labour and the Lib Dems, who are absolutely obsessed with these environmental green policies, and this is putting clear blue water between the political parties. Your thoughts? I know that you're from the CPA and you have a different perspective. Indeed,
it does put some clear water between Labour and Conservative, but what I think the Prime Minister needs to do is scrap the whole thing completely. It's insane, it makes no sense. Decarbonising our economy is not a sensible thing to do. If you want to remain viable and competitive on the international market, we must have a cheap source of abundant energy. It's the key to global economic prosperity. And if we don't have that, we are going to go down the same route as Germany, who decarbonised, or defossilized, I should say, a few years ago, relied on cheap Russian gas. Where has that gotten them? It was a bad move then, and it's a bad move now. He just needs to scrap the entire thing and get sensible policies in place. What I liked about Liz Truss, she was committed to unleashing UK energy resources. We have enough to fuel us for the next 200 years at least. Our own natural resources. We need to unleash the energy supply we have in this nation, unleash it, and we'll see our economy go like a rocket.
Absolutely, and of course we all want that as well. And what are your thoughts on this one? I mean, what position do you think, Derek, this puts the Labour Party in now? Because they are totally committed to pursuing this green agenda, far more so than the Conservative Party, including the Liberal Democrats. And if they are seeing that the electorate or the British public have to pay that high price for it, most people are going to vote with their wallet and decide, no, I'm not going to vote Labour or the Lib Democrats because it's going to cost me too much.
Well, I'm pleased to see that there is some clear gap between the two parties at long last. And yes, in one sense, I say, let's have a wider gap, and then we can see where things are going to go. But I come back to what I said. The Prime Minister has to make it even more wider, because the whole concept of the climate thing is debatable.
Yeah. Maureen, I'm just going to take, for example, you live in London with Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has just recently, back in August, introduced the ULEZ zone, which extended as far as like central London, then all the way out to the M25. And again, these green policies that have been implemented either by the Mayor of London or by the government, they always fall on the burden of the poor, and particularly poor people who can't afford to buy a new car. They can't afford to have an electric car, and yet they're being penalised by paying an extra £12 a day just to be able to travel to work. Or if they live in London, they have to pay £12.50 a day just to have their car standing in London because it doesn't meet the ULEZ zone. And so therefore, isn't there a danger that these policies are going to make the rich richer and the poor poorer, and the gap between the rich and poor is going to even be bigger than it was before in the name and in the sake of saving the planet?
Indeed, that's the whole agenda, Simon. This whole purpose of these policies is to penalise those of us who don't have the billions and squillions, and where the cost of living is not an issue for those who have, an abundance of money. It's all about controlling our behaviour as well. So instead of saying to people, if you don't want to drive, you don't have to, it's your choice. No, you say to them, if you choose to drive, we're going to tax you. And in order not to be taxed, this is what's required. You have to get an EV vehicle or a ULEZ compliant vehicle. It's all designed to control our behaviour, like 15-minute cities, the same idea, all right? Control us. So we do exactly what they want us to do. They want us to... I have no problem taking public transport, mind you. I like public transport. London public transport is great, but it should be my choice. I should not be forced to do something because I'm going to be taxed if I don't comply. So essentially it should be my choice. I don't need to be paying you money for something I should be able to just make a choice to do.
No, absolutely, which is a basic human right. And Derek, to think that families who have oil or liquid petroleum gas boilers and coal heating systems are facing the prospect of having to scrap this after 2026. And now they're looking to have to spend £10,000 or £15,000, as I mentioned earlier in the programme, to have these new heating systems put in place. But in this cost of living crisis, how many people have got an extra £10,000 or £15,000 to essentially to actually waste? And what about those that are living on the poverty line, that are struggling to even put food on the table, let alone kind of change the whole entire heating systems?
Maureen mentioned earlier on, if I get to a point where I've got to change the boiler, that's one thing. But to be told or decreed that I have to change it, no, it is totally wrong. It really is wrong. You should be allowed to keep it until it has to be changed. Then you make a proper decision. That is fine, and I accept that, but I won't accept the other, and they are wrong. They are really wrong.
And also when it comes to landlords as well, and this is what makes you question whether we have a conservative government that believes in free enterprise, because when you look at the government's environmental flagship policies, Maureen, you realise that effectively they're not, and they want to penalise landlords. So we're seeing here there's a decision to reverse the policies affecting landlords, that they will no longer be forced to make costly improvements to their rental properties after Mr. Sunak scrapped requirements to make homes more energy efficient. So to meet the new rules, property owners would have had to spend an average of £8,000 of installation and other improvements. And according to research by the estate agents Hamptons, failure to do so could lead to a £30,000 fine. Now, we could have a debate about second ownership, but surely if people have the resources and they want to buy a second home, essentially what is wrong with that? And effectively, this is penalising anyone who wants to make an extra bit of money by having a second property and renting it out.
Exactly. Listen, I'm all for landlords maintaining their homes that they're renting out, okay? They should be safe, they should be warm, and should be dry. Those are the essentials. I think the Decent Home Act covers that. But we don't need to be forcing landlords to make upgrades where the motivation is saving the planet. We can't save the planet. We know what the word says. The Revelation is quite clear who's going to renew this planet. It's God. He created it. He can destroy it. Our actions are not going to destroy this planet. So forcing landlords to do upgrades that supposedly the beneficiary is the planet, it's so ridiculous. Because I'd like someone to explain to me why carbon has suddenly become the enemy of humanity. Someone has not explained that to me yet.
Yeah, and we're no longer interested in fighting good and evil. We're no longer interested in promoting democracy and religious freedom around the world. It's all about protecting the environment, but the extent this is also bringing in authoritarian policies.
Exactly.
I mean, one of the government initiatives, Derek, that I didn't even know about regarding this one before the programme was the idea the government wanted to introduce carpooling. So anyone who needs their car to go to work would be forced to give someone else a lift and share a car with carpooling. I mean, some of these environmental policies go ridiculously mad, or get rid of your car when people live in rural communities. And it's not always easy to do that. Maybe it's good if you have close friends and neighbours, they work in the same place, go in the same destination, that's fine. But to actually impose that, surely this is authoritarian.
Of course it is. This came in, there was a talk about this a while ago, some years ago, and I thought then, how on earth can if you're going to the same place and you've got a neighbour, that's great, as you said. But if you go all over the place and you're driving here, there and everywhere, that's impossible. And no, they should not be mandating that whatsoever. And if I may just put one further point, the whole subject of the climate change, I go back to Genesis, where God spoke to Noah and he said, I won't do this, I won't flood the earth again. But he made a promise that seed time and harvest, winter and summer would not cease until the end of time. So God has this under control.
Amen.
100%.
Absolutely. And Maureen, another aspect of these environmental policies the government said it was going to be pursuing is now being pushed back, and I didn't know about this one either, was that the government was going to place a tax on meat and dairy to discourage the consumer from buying dairy products or eating meat. And there was also this mad proposal by the World Economic Forum that we should all eat bugs and be happy. Are we living in this parallel universe, or these people living in this parallel universe, that to take away people's dietary food and their choice of food obviously upset farmers, but to say we can't eat meat and to say we can't eat dairy, what are we living in, a totalitarian state all of a sudden? Your thoughts?
It's like going back to the food law, Leviticus. And quite frankly, with this climate control nonsense, it's a religion in and of itself, okay? They're worshipping at the feet of the planet and the climate. That's what's happening here. It's all complete madness. We'll eat bugs and they'll eat steak. This is the whole idea. No, if we want to make our choices to eat meat, we can, but we don't need to be taxed. Exactly. To make those choices. Exactly.
So Derek and Maureen, thank you so much for being my guests on Politics Today, and enjoy your dairy and enjoy your meat. And I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I think it's imperative that we put pressure on the government to say that these environmental policies are not going to work. They are going to bring about more authoritarian control by government, and we want less state government interference on our life and more freedom. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.